In yesterday's video, we highlighted the importance of the tether dominance chart for deciding the current direction or the short-term current resolution for Bitcoin. And in this case, obviously we have seen it break down below the low that we were looking at on yesterday's video from 498. And we have now seen a nice closure below and indeed continuation below as well. It is currently based off of that white 200 moving average, but overall, this does confirm the breakdown. And I do suspect that we will see higher term timeframes follow through as well, like the weekly and the monthly as well here. Very likely at least getting down somewhere around the last prior macro lows that we did see in January of 2025. And then of course the year prior in March. And these have correlated with major tops on Bitcoin. So overall, as long as this one is angled to the downside, yes, kind of have to be bullish on Bitcoin. And of course, we did have setups in yesterday's video that were suggesting more upside as well, even though my personal bias is more on the cautious side. And I still think that there is a really good likelihood of like a swift pullback for Bitcoin. But of course, just in the same way of yesterday's video and the day prior, and really the past couple of weeks, as long as Bitcoin is above the daily price action pivot indicator right here, it is bullish and upside is more likely. And there's no downside triggers as long as Bitcoin is, again, above this pivot, which is a point that perhaps many people have misheard me on. But despite my opinion on it, if Bitcoin, as long as Bitcoin's above it, yes, I do have to look for Bitcoin to travel upwards and more. However, if and when Bitcoin does come back down below, that would be my major indication for a much more corrective segment, which I do think would still align for a longer bull market and likely much more higher price targets as well. But for right now, the price action pivot is actually unchanged from yesterday to today. We did see it move up several times in the past couple of weeks, but I imagine coming into maybe Saturday or Sunday, we will see it move up yet again, very likely somewhere around yesterday's low, which is low $97,000 territory. So I would say that would be kind of like a tentative price action pivot. I'm just kind of estimating that it will move up there relatively soon. Anyways, on top of that, we should go over some of those some of those upside targeting models that we were looking at. One of them was, of course, the meta signal setup over here. This is one that we actually spoke about. Like, I think last time was back on over here when Bitcoin first hit 95,000 bucks. This one fired off, of course, at 83,400 almost, and it did have target number 1 at 87,250. Obviously, that one was hit rather quickly. Then target number 2 at 95,000 bucks. Again, that one got hit, feels like a little bit quickly as well. Now, target number 3, which is a lower probability. It is below 30% probability, despite this being, a relatively powerful signal here, 1.11. It is actually just above $110,000. So, Meta signals has been, it's actually been very good this past month or two. But in this case, do I think that things could go even higher than where it's at right now? Yeah, I do think so, because that can also be combined, of course, with the 5-day 5 EMA setup as well. We spoke about this on yesterday's video and several times in past videos as well. And we did see that this one fired off at 83,650. And as of right now, with Bitcoin at 103, I mean, it is getting very close to the average winning return trade that we typically get from this one, which if we can show right here, let me just, again, back test this one from 2018 to current times. And we can see in the trade analysis that the average winning trade did return about 30%. Is that something else that we've seen as well? Well, if we add about 30% to that entry, 30% puts you at what? $110,000. So I do think that is kind of like the maximum Boolah hopium for the continuation of this current move. Like I said, I would be really defensive against a pullback because, I do think that one is coming relatively soon, and when it does come, it'll very likely be very swift. But can we see a spike further to the upside first before anything else? I think it's definitely possible here. On top of that, we are also looking at the HPDR on the daily time frame for getting some areas of interest in the more relatively short term. That was between about 101,500 to about 103,500. Obviously, Bitcoin did reach its way there. So I would be looking at this as likely to consolidate, over this weekend between about 102 to the downside versus about 104.5 to the upside. But this is still in a posture that can lead towards short-term continuation here. So, I would be cognizant of that, especially as long as Bitcoin's closing above 102. I mean, this thing can basically spike the prior all-time high and maybe even make a slightly new high at 110. However, with all of this said, I do want to reiterate, and I know I'm going to sound like a fucking fool, but I do want to reiterate that, I really personally do not want to be aggressive during these times. Not only are we kind of deep into this market cycle, we're in year number 3 since the bull market began in about 2023. Yes, year number 3. Yes. Okay. My brain almost broke right there. But also many of the things that we've been looking at, they're getting to really, 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 really critical levels. Yes, they have not fired off just yet. Yes, I know some people are going to absolutely fucking hate what I'm about to say, but it is still there. One, we see that daily stochastic momentum oscillator is deep inside that critical zone. Yes, it still is remaining above the critical zone of 80, which was our trigger or a preemptive trigger for looking for, a short-term correction. And it has continued to fail to close below there. Now it is going to be popping back up again and will be continuing to the upside very likely today, assuming Bitcoin does remain above 101,500. So I do think that, an extension of this move is probably more likely than not in the short term, but naturally it's almost a 100% given that this will create some bearish divergence on whatever new high that Bitcoin does put in. On top of that, we can go to the 2-day time frame. This one's also deep inside that critical zone. The highest level that we've seen in, it's going to be like many years, actually. The highest level that we've seen since October of 2021. October of 2021 was actually on the, on the way of the rally to Bitcoin's last all-time high, actually. Now, it did actually move a little bit higher than that October read, but it did put in that divergence, and that was actually the high of the cycle. The 3-day time frame is also getting way the fuck up here to levels that we have not seen in a long fucking time, and that one continues up as long as Bitcoin's above 102,650. So, these are getting quite close to current price action. It's not going to take too much to force these down. But again, can Bitcoin spike a little bit higher first and then play out a pullback? I think that's probably more likely. But like I've been saying, it's like these are really fucking close. And the 5-day time frame is now getting actually into the critical zone as well. I don't think that this one turns down anytime soon. But hey, just another thing saying, if you're looking for this one to, to blast on to massively new all-time highs, it might not necessarily be the most like logical thing. Anyways, on top of that, we also do see, if we go back to that tether dominance chart, that tether dominance, which we expect to play inversely of Bitcoin, is basing off of the white 200 simple moving average here. I don't know if it actually matters for tether dominance because it doesn't really seem to play off of it much in the past, but just pointing out something for a little bit of the short term, just to spend some time maybe diddle daddling around that, around that moving average, get a few wicks below and then put in a bounce and then come back down. I think that is a little bit likely, but on top of this, we can go back to is it right here? Yes. We can go back to our RSI chart as well. And you can imagine that compared to the highs that we saw in November and then again in January, this is, again, undoubtedly going to be creating some divergence at some point. Of course, it can continue some more from here, but whether it gets up all the way to like 80 or whether it stalls out around 75, that's still going to be divergence by the very definition of it. Even if we go to the 5-day time frame, same thing over here as well. It's like it's nearly a guarantee that it will be relevant at some point. Same thing with the weekly as well. Same thing with the monthly here too. Like all of these are kind of setting up for that in a more long-term fashion, but in the short term, can Bitcoin continue a little bit more? Sure. Yes. It's not going to take too much, again, on this rally for that to occur. And then, of course, the last one that I'll leave you with is right on over here. It is the MACD, the old MACD, and the MACD is getting a fresh cross to the upside, actually, as of today's weekly closure for, I believe, CME. It will indeed confirm across the upside, assuming that it does remain above $102,700 again on CME, which CME trades at a premium over spot price action. So it's It's a little bit further away, to be fair. But yeah, even on this one, again, you are going to naturally have very likely some bearish divergence, even if this does continue. And the monthly still has me like very long-term concerned as well. I mean, these are typically reads that you expect near the end of the cycle. But even with all of this said, with the way that Bitcoin is looking right now, if I'm still going to kind of update my sort of long-term view on this market cycle and where I think in terms of timing things generally end, Well, I would say probably the easiest way to look at this would be to actually go back here to the tether dominance chart. And I do believe that when we see tether dominance get back down to these same lows that we saw from March of last year and then January of this year, you're probably about, in terms of time, maybe about 1 month away from the actual high. So obviously that would imply some downside in between there. Again, that can take, another 1, 2, maybe even 3 months. That brings us to July at the earliest, which is where I think is probably the earliest time we see this market top. And then maybe that gives a date of like end of September. So the end of the third quarter for a potential, timing of this. So I'd say, again, like middle of July to end of September, something like this with the way that things are looking as of right now. Anyways, all of this is just advice. No, all of this is not financial advice. I'm just a dummy talking on the internet. Do whatever the fuck you'd like to do.